Dre'Mont Jones is the newest Baltimore Raven, and he wasted no time making an impression with some chilling words. We talk about that and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here today on this Thursday, a crossover Thursday edition of the show, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. And thank you out there to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners. If you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. We do have a jam-packed episode today, as we're going to dive into a bunch of things relating to this Ravens team. It's crossover Thursday. We'll have Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings hopping on with us, talking all things about the Ravens and Vikings Week 10 matchup. But first, we're going to do a little bit about Dre'Mont Jones making a really big first impression with some chilling words, talking about this Baltimore Ravens team, what he brings to the table. John Harbaugh also talked as well about the Dre'Mont Jones trade. So we have a lot coming your way over here on Locked On Ravens. I want to tell everyone that today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you and presented by PrizePicks. Now, the PrizePicks app today, and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, Dre'Mont Jones spoke to the media for the first time since being traded and got into the intricacies of being traded, saying it's been some of the craziest moments of his life. And, he said it was a sign of respect that, the Ravens traded for him, knowing that they needed pass rush. Talked about the fact that he's had a sack or more in 4 straight games. But he was also asked about what the Ravens can expect to get out of him as a player. And he had some chilling words in a good way. I mean, this fires me up. He said, quote, somebody who was physical as hell, somebody who was going to attack every play like it's my last, and we're going to go out there and just try to kill or be killed. Woo! That's the mentality that I like. I like that mentality. This is what the Ravens need. They need Dre'Mont Jones already dog. This guy seems like he's an absolute dog. And, I think that that's a great mindset to have. And he talked about impressions of the coaching staff. He said he doesn't know them that well yet, but he said he's liking their approach and their high energy people, which he appreciates. So Dre'Mont Jones already feeling like a high energy guy. Someone's going to come in there, give this pass rush some juice. We know the Ravens, they've been blitzing a lot, but they need to win more one-on-one, and Dre'Mont Jones, with his versatility, both inside and outside, can give that to them. So, man, I'll tell you what, I'm really pumped for Dre'Mont Jones in Baltimore. Again, it was disappointing the Ravens didn't do more at the deadline, bringing in a guy maybe that wasn't traded at the deadline. I'm not talking like Quinnen Williams, because, that would have been great, but I knew the Ravens weren't giving up a first-round pick at the deadline. But is just looking at these moves in a vacuum, Loki Gilman has played great for them and has really helped that defense. And I think Dre'Mont Jones, that move is still solid, but it just wasn't that I don't know if big splash is the right word, but I think it was a solid splash that the Ravens made there. John Harbaugh also talked a little bit about the move itself and revealed some stuff about it. He said that, he's happy with the trade. It's something that apparently has been in the works for a while. So that tells me that this was their guy. I don't know if we're going to hear anything about guys the Ravens are also interested in, but feels like Dre'Mont Jones was one of, if not their top target here. He said that he's a good fit for them. The system he's been in for the last 3 years is the same system. So he picks it up quickly there, said he's a really good fit, style of play wise, and said that he'll be playing on Sunday and get a rhythm. He also talked about Carl Lawson on Monday that, he'll be kind of ready as well. So Ravens are getting some pass rushing reinforcements. John Harbaugh did also mention the versatility, and he said that he hasn't really been doing that this year, but he's done it a lot in the past. So that hints to me that Baltimore's going to try to unlock that versatility a little bit more than Tennessee was trying to, which I think also is really interesting. Also, the Ravens clean injury report on the day on Wednesday. Literally nobody, every single player participated fully in practice. It was absolutely beautiful. One of the most beautiful graphics I've ever seen on social media, because there was no graphic. The Ravens just put out a statement. So already a good start to the week here for Baltimore. I love Dre'Mont Jones' attitude. Hopefully he'll bring the heat and he'll pump up this Ravens defense, a defense that is starting to find their stride, but still needs to prove they can put it together over a long stretch. And also really interesting tidbits from John Harbaugh on the deal as well. But now we're going to dive into our conversation with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, talking about key storylines, keys to victory, and players to watch, as well as so much more.
Kevin, how are we feeling about the Ravens having a fully cleared and empty injury report?
I don't know if I've ever seen this in my life. I genuinely, it was probably one of the most beautiful injury reports I've ever seen. I mean, honestly, I haven't seen a graphic like that where, the Vikings have their injuries, and then for the Ravens, there's no chart, and it's just all players were full participants in practice, which again, with the way that they were about a month or a month and a half ago, their defense was depleted. Lamar Jackson was out, and obviously they still have guys on IR that are key impact players, but to have your full 53-man healthy, practicing, and ready to go, I mean, especially here at the beginning of November, I mean, that's pretty rare, I'd say.
Yeah. This Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That is a huge thing for the Ravens, who have had a pretty rough start to the year. I mean, 3-5. That's not where the Ravens thought that they would be, but so much of it was chalked up to injuries, particularly an injury to Lamar Jackson, which is very well in the past. I think the only time I've ever seen that on the Vikings side, I think it might have been 2020 or a year that was similarly injury ridden, because they were pretty banged up in 2020, but it was just because every injury had gone to IR. Yeah. Everybody was either like season ending or fine, and it just like never got like a normal like twisted ankle. But I guess we can kind of start there with the return of Lamar Jackson. He is fully back. There's no limitations. There's no, he's playing hobbled or anything like that. We are getting the full experience of Lamar Jackson this year, it sounds like, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's been great to start the year, and obviously going through that stretch with him being out again just kind of reaffirms how valuable he is to this Ravens team. He's the guy that makes things go. But the thing that's been so incredible with Lamar Jackson, especially with his development, is how he's been able to add on to his game, I feel like, every single season. We're coming out of school, much like almost every single player is. There are always things to work on, but we've seen Lamar improve in so many different areas. And I think, to me, one of the big things that we've seen from Lamar, particularly this season, is him continuing to just be really cool and calm and collected. He doesn't get rattled. I mean, if you send guys at him, he's going to, step up in the pocket, run up the middle. He'll work outside and kind of float down the side until he sees someone and he floats it over the top. He waits for things to develop. And I think he's turned into a very low mistake player. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot. It's very rare he does something like that, especially over the last couple of seasons. Now, for the Ravens, they're 3-5. Their record isn't where they need it to be or where they definitely wanted it to be. But over those first 3 weeks of the season, they put up back-to-back 40-point games, and then you had the 30-plus against Detroit. And so the offense and scoring itself hasn't been the problem, but when you're asking Lamar Jackson to go out there and say, all right, score 40 points every game and you still might lose the game, that is where the issue lies. So he's been spreading the ball out a little bit more recently. Him coming back in Miami, he was able to spread the ball around. Zay Flowers has been more so the dominant target share guy for them this season. But I think this offense is at its best when Lamar is spreading the football around. So, obviously he's one of the best, if not the best, quarterbacks in the NFL. And he is playing like that this season still, despite Baltimore's record.
Yeah. So there's this thing with that we've been hyper aware of over here in Minnesota with Lamar Jackson, that is record versus the NFC, which is, he's always plays really great in these cross-conference games. And I have to imagine some of that is because, Lamar Jackson is such a unique player. There is no NFC Lamar Jackson. Like, the closest you would get is like Jaden Daniels, but like that feels like we're already going to strain something. We're reaching so hard. So I wonder what it is. You and I haven't gotten to do these crossovers a lot. It's been 4 years since we did one. So I think it's probably appropriate to just ask, what makes Lamar Jackson so lethal? And in particular, we'll get to the Brian Flores of it too. What makes him lethal, and how does that affected by a team that's going to want to blitz him a lot?
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes Lamar so good is his ability to scan the field, go through his reads, and like I kind of said, never really be fazed by anything. we'll get to the Flores thing, but that 2021 game in Miami, just consistent blitz after blitz after blitz. And you could tell like he was rattled in that game and he had no answers. He was getting frustrated.
Yeah. This was back with Miami. The Bengal Hawk was like kind of coming out party game that you might remember during a Miami year where they were kind of in the tank.
Yeah. So that game, it was like, okay. And they went back to the drawing board there. They figured all of that out. But Lamar Jackson being a 3-level quarterback, being able to deliver those short, intermediate, and deep throws to players is one of the things that makes him so incredible. But the things that he can do, not only standing in there and delivering in the pocket, which is obviously where he wants to be. Like, if you just let Lamar, if you rush with 4, you don't get there. He's just going to sit back there and dice your defense up. But when there is pressure, there's a multi-step process to getting Lamar Jackson on the ground for a sack. It's not like Ravens fans had to watch Cooper Rush the last couple of weeks before Tyler Huntley stepped in. Like, it's a different ball game when it's more of a statue quarterback where it's all right, you beat your lineman, you get to the quarterback, and that's it. With Lamar Jackson, it's you beat your lineman and now run all around the field and chase him all around and see what he can do. And so that's where a lot of people say, if you want to stop Lamar Jackson, you want to keep him in the pocket. The problem is in the pocket, he's at his best.
Right. Well, now you're just letting the quarterback hang out in the pocket. You can't let that happen too.
And the off-script stuff is like probably the most dangerous stuff because, guys run around and will work back. And we know Luke corners and secondary, people can only cover for so long.
No. And, I mean, look at the Vikings against the Eagles. They got smoked on these scramble drills a couple weeks ago.
Right. But it's where there's not a winning situation for you unless you get in Lamar's head. And part of that, honestly, has had to do a little bit because, you hate to see like in Houston, for example, with CJ Stroud, you see him get happy feet all the time against that offensive line. It's bad. And so for Lamar, the O-line has not been great this season. I'm sure we'll get into that as the show goes on. So pressuring Lamar and getting him out of the pocket, like he's going to get his, like there's 1 or 2 spectacular plays a game. Like, how did he do that? How do you evade all these guys? But if you keep him in the pocket, which you eliminate that off-script stuff, but you can't get pressure on him immediately, you can't bring him down, he is going to make you pay. And the NFC stuff, Luke, is true where there isn't that NFC Lamar Jackson. And I'm sure that like when these guys watch tape of Lamar and maybe they've played him once or haven't played him before even, it's like, all right.
Or they were with another team or something, but you're talking about, a handful of guys on each team that maybe know what this guy's like.
Yeah, and then you see it on tape, you're like, okay, like if I can get to this spot and cut him off, or I can reach him there, and then you play him in the game and he just zooms by you, and you're like, oh, he's a lot faster than he looks on the tape. And so that it's just like with the Steelers, for example, who have been, I think, the hardest team for Lamar to play against defensively. They see him twice a year, so they're able to kind of figure things out and game plan and whatnot. Now for the Ohio teams in the North, it hasn't been as successful for them, but again, it's circumstantial, but Lamar, there's so many ways he can beat you, and it takes a very specific type of game plan to beat him, which I'm sure we're going to talk about here with Brian Flores and what he was able to do in 2021.
Well, yeah, that's part of it. And so the Vikings defense has had a bit of an interesting arc this season, right? Where they had a lot of struggles and stuff, but a lot of the way that teams were attacking them has like evolved in a way that I think is fascinating. They've seen a ton of heavy personnel. There was a True Media stat that I pulled before last week. I don't know how it updated after the Lions game, but they led the league in all kinds of these categories of, these heavy personnel, 3 tight ends or, 2 running backs and 2 tight ends or extra O-line. They're top 5 in all of those categories at least, and number 1 in a bunch of them. So in terms of how much that they have faced. So teams have basically decided that they're going to attack this Flores defense by going heavy and saying, the Vikings are a little bit light in the pants and their run defense has struggled because of this. So this becomes the Derrick Henry question. Could the Ravens walk into this game and say, you know what, Lamar, you can take half a day off. This one's going to be a King Henry kind of game. Or like the Vikings kind of thrive in a world where they get to put all their speed guys on the field. That's like where they want to be. And then they can blitz them and then all those guys can chase down any quarterback, Lamar or otherwise. Or do they say, let's get all those guys off the field, but then you've got a scramble drill where you might have 3 tight ends in the pass concept. What would the Ravens prefer to do there?
Ideally, they'd try to go heavy on heavy and just see if it would work for them and just kind of try to utilize Derrick Henry that way. It's been difficult because they haven't had a lot of success in that regard so far because of the way the offensive line is played. especially the guard positions with Daniel Falele and Andrew Voorhees. But the thing with Baltimore is they need to be, at least in my opinion, on the offensive side of the ball for the Ravens, getting in second and manageable and third and manageable situations. And how you do that is I think you just try to attack Minnesota straight up with your heavy personnel, and you get your run game going over the course of the year, for Baltimore this season. On third down offensively, they're a middling of the pack third down offense, but Minnesota's been really good there this season. They're a top 10 third down defense. And part of the reason the Ravens seem to get themselves in a lot of trouble offensively is because they just get beat off the line, and, either guys get blown off the ball or people are in the backfield. And, I don't care if you're Lamar Jackson, if you're Derrick Henry, you're not going anywhere if the offensive line can't block and you have four guys charging at you, 1 yard down the field. So I think that Baltimore, if they can establish their run with their heavy personnel, then they can keep that same personnel in and then use play action off of that. We've seen Mark Andrews start to step up. He had 2 touchdowns in that Miami game. Isaiah Likely's working his way back. And even Charlie Kohler, who's their third string tight end, is starting to get more involved in the passing game too. So if they can open up rushing lanes, get really good yardage on first and second down using their heavy personnel and forcing Minnesota to go into that grouping and having success against it, then you can work play action with Lamar Jackson. And all of a sudden the defense, those linebackers and safeties are going to take a step up, anticipating and saying, we need to get a stop here on the ground. They can't keep averaging 5, 6, 7 yards a carry. Then you can try to plop that over the linebacker's head with one of your tight ends, or maybe Zay Flowers is the lone receiver on that field.
It's going to, I think, have to be something over the middle of the field to a tight end has been a mainstay for every Vikings opponent dating back to like 2023. We'll see how that goes, but there's also the other side of the ball and what's going on with, I think, 2 units that have struggled a lot in the Vikings offense and the Ravens defense. So we'll get into that next here on a Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. This episode of Crossover Thursday is brought to you by Mizzen and Main. Fellas, you look good, you feel good, you play good, right? Somebody very smart said that. But sometimes when you look good, you don't actually feel good, because sometimes the dress clothes can be very stuffy and they don't breathe right and they're stiff and they're high maintenance. But that is where Mizzen and Main comes in. They make classic menswear with performance fabrics, so it's effortless to look sharp and feel comfortable. The shirts are stretchy, moisture wicking, wrinkle resistant, and machine washable, so you don't have to worry about ironing or taking it all the way to the dry cleaners. It's so much easier to manage, easier to wear, and you look great. It's the feel of athletic wear, but the look of professional menswear. Right now, Mizzen and Main is offering our listeners 20% off of your first purchase at mizzenandmain.com with promo code LOCKEDONNFL20. That's Mizzen, spelled M-I-Z-Z-E-N, and Main, M-A-I-N.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL20 for 20% off. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen and Main stores in select states. This episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the best place to play daily fantasy. Look, you make decisions every day, and I know all of you have takes, for example, on how well Ravens and Vikings will do in this game. So if you want to take a Lamar Jackson, if you saw what Justin Herbert did maybe on Thursday Night Football, and you want to say that Lamar Jackson is going to rush for a lot of yards, you can, of course, put that in your play. 2 to 6 of your favorite plays like that, and whether they'll do better or worse than their PrizePicks projection. And if you're right, you can win big. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Moving on here with Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. Kevin, so let's flip to the other side of the ball here with the Vikings on offense and the Ravens on defense. So I'll start with what has kind of gone on the Vikings offense this year. Statistically, the offense is terrible. A bunch of that has been Carson Wentz games, and a lot of the problems there were due to having backups in that won't be playing in this game. Pressure coming against a backup tackle. Well, the starters are back and they're healthy and they're off the injury report. And then of course Carson Wentz is no longer, he's on IR. JJ McCarthy back healthy off the injury report. There's still some stuff. Aaron Jones has a shoulder thing, but Jordan Mason has mostly been good in his stead. Had a rough week last week, but has had a good season overall. And so the kind of debate is how much you can chalk up to how much of the Vikings struggles on offense you can chalk up to, well, it was backups in. And I think it's some, but not all. I think there's been some schematic stuff of being a little bit too greedy and over aggressive with shot plays and trying to hold the ball too long when you didn't have the line that could hold up to that. But we still, I think, are in a world where, because we have seen so little of JJ McCarthy over the last 2 years, he's only played 3 games, we don't have a perfect sense for what the ideal of the offense is, what Kevin O'Connell wants to be calling with JJ McCarthy. We know a lot about what he's going to do with backup quarterbacks or guys he didn't think would be in there. Over the years, we've seen him work with backups enough to know what his kind of easy mode offense is. But the hard mode offense, you are the starter, you're our guy, you're our franchise, what that offense is still difficult to pin down, which is both because I don't think they have a great sense of identity internally, but it also kind of works in their favor sometimes because there's not a lot of tape on whatever that is.
I think for me, with Baltimore's defense, they play a very specific brand of football where they do the bend don't break thing, but they really they do the bend don't break thing, where when you have a receiver that wants to beat this defense deep, 60-yard touchdown on the field, you're rarely going to see that happen. The Ravens let you take that short to intermediate stuff, and they essentially are going to dare you to score touchdowns. And their goal is to make you kick on every possession, either a field goal or a punt, because if you do that, you're not going to beat a Lamar Jackson-led offense that can put up points in a hurry. In order to keep up with the Ravens offense, and obviously that's when they're on, you're going to have to score touchdowns. And so the Ravens this season, it's been a rough year defensively, but we have seen some positives over the course of the last couple of weeks. I mean, I can't imagine – I don't even know if there's been a bigger vibe shift in the NFL from where this team was 2 Saturdays ago to where they were last Saturday with, the whole Lamar Jackson practice thing coming out, Lamar being ruled out for the Bears game. They're 1-5, and then fast forward a week and they've won their next 2 games and looked pretty good doing it. So
yeah, Steelers fall apart a little and you're starting to smell blood in the water. The AFC North is fascinating. We've talked about it a ton on Locked On NFL.
You think Daniel Jones and you expect him to help you out if you're Baltimore, and then he just 5 turnovers against the Steelers. Are like, come on, this is the game you decide to go back to New York. So, Pittsburgh, what they did, Joe Flacco, Raven at heart, has helped them out, and other guys as well. So with Baltimore, they've been a historically bad defense rushing with 4. They cannot generate pressure without blitzing. It's been really, really hard for them this season. There was a stat that came from SIS that said, since losing Nnamdi Madubuike, the Ravens' pressure rate on plays without blitzes is at an NFL worst 17.2%. And for context, over the past decade, no team has ever finished the season in that time frame below 20%. So it's been rough. They've had to up their pressure rates by upping their blitz rates, which has been effective for them. And obviously, they made a trade. They traded Nafeowe away for Lohi Gilman. And what Gilman has allowed the Ravens to do is Gilman has been playing in the deeper part of the field, which has allowed Kyle Hamilton to move up and go back to being a Swiss Army knife. And what they've actually done with him is they've been using him almost as an edge guy. They've been putting him up towards the line. They've been playing him as a big nickel. And what he'll do, he shoots off of the line so quickly, and you have to know where he is on every single play. And so it gives the Ravens defense a lot more unpredictability. So I think that Baltimore's goal against an offense like a Vikings team that, again, you mentioned it, just like the unpredictability of not having snaps together, not having that body of work, is probably going to be like controlled chaos. Like try to make things as chaotic as possible for a young signal caller who just hasn't had that many NFL moments before, and having to navigate through that. And like the game that we saw against Detroit and Minnesota being able to pull out that win, I mean, it's an extremely impressive thing that they're able to do. But I think that Baltimore is going to try to use their blitzes and their pressures. They traded for Dre'Mont Jones on Monday from Tennessee, who started his career as a D lineman in Denver and then has kind of now shifted more to an outside-inside role. So they're hoping that he and Carl Lawson, former Jets and Bengals pass rusher, he played for the Cowboys last year, he will probably be called up for this game. So they're looking for guys that can win one-on-one. But I think that Baltimore, their plan, they might tear a page out of Brian Flores' book and say, hey, we're just going to blitz you a bunch, and we're going to take that pressure, we're going to throw it in your face and see how you can handle it. I think that that's going to be their plan, to try to give JJ McCarthy a bunch of unique looks that he just hasn't seen before.
It's probably a decent plan against any young QB. It's funny because when the ball got out against the blitz, it was almost always a good thing. It really didn't turn into what some teams turn into versus the blitz, where they get like hyper conservative in its completion for 2 yards. When they would either pick up the blitz or beat the blitz, they could really get some good opportunities going. But those blitzes turned into sacks a lot. Jordan Mason, who figures to be the every down back this game, struggle a lot in pass pro. So I'm sure the Ravens are licking their chops there. But I think to a greater degree, one thing that O'Connell, this is a criticism I've had of O'Connell against these blitz heavy games, is that especially when you're in long yardage, he just won't bother to have a check down. And he'll say, whatever, I don't care about a sack. 3rd and 19 is the same as 4th and 19 and 4th and 10 are the same to me. We're all just punting. So, but what that means is that the idea of flipping the ball out to your running back in the flat with nobody in front of him that beats a blitz because all the players went and then suddenly he can waltz to the first down marker just can't ever happen. So you kind of get this, like they either have to pick it up or they die, and the Vikings haven't been good enough at picking it up. But we'll see if they continue to do that, or if McCarthy is able to kind of find those blitz looks. Because if you show blitz pre-snap, they do have checks, and he does make them into a screen that'll beat it. And actually, on a 3rd and 10 in that Lions game, there was this really obvious like cover 0 blitz look. He checked into a tunnel screen, and the Vikings converted. So they do have some tools for that, and maybe they're getting a little better. Plus, again, the offensive line getting a lot healthier is helpful. Christian Darrisaw's a dog. Brian O'Neill's a dog. Donovan Jackson has had, I would say, an up and down season, but you love that for a rookie guard, and has had a few games where he's been just absolutely fantastic. They do have a backup or a 3rd string center in Blake Brandel, who started playing center for the first time in the international road trip against the Browns. That was the first time he ever played center in his life. So he learned that skill in like a soccer field in London and is still playing that as Ryan Kelly works back from a pretty scary concussion situation. Yeah. So they have a lot of these like protection issues that have caused, and some of it is on both Wentz and McCarthy holding the ball too long or turning something down. And now they've kind of brought this on themselves too. The Vikings have, since Kevin O'Connell got here, had a problem with just trying to get the 20-yard route a little too much, and then suddenly the quarterback's just a sitting duck. So if you want to send guys, you can send guys. And I think that will maybe be a key to this game is, can the Vikings punish that, or will they just kind of sink into their like, oops, all shot plays mode that Kevin O'Connell can get into sometimes, and suddenly you're taking 3 sacks in a row and punting on 4th and 35. But like, look, these teams have both had their issues, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that those issues are behind them, both for the Ravens and the Vikings. So we'll get into that next here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This Crossover Thursday is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets anywhere for any sporting event. Look, buying tickets sucks. You have to wait in all these crazy lines. You have to queue things up. You have to try to refresh the page a whole bunch of times, and then they're going to smack you in the face with a million hidden fees while you're in a hurry to get it. Forget all that stuff. Let Gametime navigate all that stuff for you and pass the deals on to you. So I've got the Gametime app up on my phone right now for this Ravens at Vikings game. And if you want to just get in the door, you can do so right now for $135 per ticket, if just as a get in the door price, which for US Bank Stadium is amazing, by the way. Or if you can get for $354, you can get basically sideline seats and like the row 3 or something like that. There's some incredible deals on this right now. So if you want to check that stuff out with no hidden fees, that is what you pay, by the way. That is checkout price. It's faster, it's cheaper, and it's way less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. All right, Kevin. So now we kind of get to the part where we have to predict how stuff will go. And I think the best way to approach that is to look at the problems that have plagued the Ravens and Vikings and ask which ones are least likely to show up. Like, you're not going to find Cooper Rush problems in this game, but those problems have been a big reason why the Ravens are 3-5 going into this one. So have the Ravens really found that stride, or are there still a lot of growing pains and weird stuff that they have to figure out? Because when they were healthy, they started 0-2 as well. Have they figured out the stuff that led to that, or are there still concerns that maybe are going to keep plaguing them all year?
Yeah, I think the big concern is on the O-line with the guard positions with Daniel Falele and Andrew Voorhees. And it's not just them. I mean, the O-line has been kind of in a bad place all season. Roger Rosengarten has regressed from year one to year two. Ronnie Stanley's been in and out of the lineup with injuries. And, it's those little like annoying things where like he'll go out for a series or two and then come back, or he'll, have to miss a game and come back. So, he hasn't had as many snaps this season. But to me, I think that for the Ravens, if they cannot protect Lamar Jackson, they're not going to win. And we've seen that where consistent and constant pressure is sometimes come up in Lamar Jackson's face, but Lamar's one of the best quarterbacks in the league and almost masking poor offensive line play, because with a lot of those statue quarterbacks like we talked about earlier in the show, there's not a lot of time for them to escape. They just, all right, hey, I'm laying down here. You got me. For Lamar, he's always going to try to extend the play and make something happen. So that's one. And then obviously defensively, one of the things that Baltimore does is they play very soft coverage regardless of circumstance on some of these drives, where it just feels like they'll play 7 or 8 yards off the ball and the opponent will be like, okay, and they'll just run a quick slant and pick up 8 yards and like, all right, we're just going to work down the field this way. I don't care. And that's kind of, again, with the Ravens bend, don't break. They're always going to play a guy deep. They're going to have guys in the back to make sure you don't beat them with long throws. So that's part of their philosophy anyway. But with the lack of pass rush they've seen at times this season, them playing off coverage and then having no resistance up front has been a recipe for disaster, which again, the blitzing has certainly helped with that because they've forced quarterbacks to get the ball out. And so one of the things you talked about in the second part of the show was just about like that short passing game, screenplays to combat the blitz. And that's actually, the Ravens got beat a couple of times on Thursday night by Miami. Just, Tua throwing the ball out to Devon Achane on a screen where they had 8 defenders up the field. And all of a sudden you have like just 1 or 2 Ravens that can be there to help get the ball carrier down. So I think that for Baltimore, they need to, because the pass rush and secondary, they're tied at the hip. If you rush the passer and you get to the quarterback quickly, it lessens the time that secondary members have to cover, which we talked about. Guys just can't cover for 6, 7, 8 seconds every single play. But if you can cover for that long, you get the coverage sacks. And it feels like Baltimore hasn't really had the best of both worlds. They've had the worst of both worlds in a lot of these games. So getting back on track there and continuing the momentum that we've seen over the past couple of weeks, because this is a different defense than we saw before the bye week. Zach Ward, their defensive coordinator, made that very clear that they worked on a lot of their pressure packages and blitz packages and essentially said, we're not going to just watch you just dice us up with us rushing 4 and getting no pressure. We're going to bring the pressure to you and make you make a throw or make you make a play. And so far, they've played the Bears and the Dolphins, which aren't exactly like the 2 top teams in the league or anything like that. But, you play who's in front of you and you get momentum. So I think that, to me, it's the offensive line play as well as the defense in terms of just getting pressure and making sure that you can get it consistently and not let JJ McCarthy sit back there and gain confidence.
And you know what? I think at a lot of times this season, you could put the Vikings in a category with those 2 teams in kind of the bottom of the league. And I think you would have been right to do so. The vibes are different now coming off this upset win over the Lions. And I think for the Vikings, a big theme of the year has been the energy. And you really saw it on Thursday night with, Carson Wentz dissolving and falling apart in real time. But you could really tell that the energy wasn't there, that the Vikings had kind of, they got punched in the mouth and they didn't get up. And the energy was weird in that international trip too. And there's been a lot of talk about how that probably wasn't a good idea to do 2 countries back to back and how they kind of regret that trip. Nobody will say that out loud, but you can tell that they do. Because they complained quite a bit about the stamina and how kind of gritty, how much grit it took just to get a game off, let alone win it against the Browns. Which you're welcome, by the way.
Yeah,
couldn't get the Steelers for you, but we got the Browns. And we got the Bengals, which I guess those aren't the ones you needed, but we got them.
All right, take what you can get.
But like the energy has been really sleepy in a lot of this. It's been really like kind of stuffed up and stodgy, and the energy in the locker room after that Lions game, it's a shot in the arm. And suddenly there is a different energy to the Vikings. And so the hope is that a lot of these, hey, pass rushers can't win a rep, pass blockers can't win a rep, the receivers aren't getting open as much as you should, as you expect them to with how good those players are. And like all that stuff was kind of true. not to mention the bad quarterback play and the play calling issues. Like everything was going wrong. And with the guy back and a lot of the healthier players back, the team really feels like, okay, no, this is what we were supposed to be. So they're looking at that Lions game going, this is what we expected. All that stuff was a fluke and are trying to put this behind them. But as 3-5 as the Ravens are, this is no slouch. And there's a reason that the Ravens are favored pretty heavily on the road by 4.5 on FanDuel. So for me, I don't blame the market for favoring the team that way, because there's still quite a bit of question around the Vikings, around McCarthy, and what they can do. But to me, it's really going to come down to whose problems, who has identified the real problems and solved them. And if you did look at it and say, well, it was just because we were injured, it was just because we were international, it was just because we didn't have our quarterback. If you do look at those, you better hope that you were right. That's what I feel like this game comes down to.
Really appreciate Luke. Be sure you go check him out over at Locked On Vikings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I have to be here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. On the way out, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button in video form and follow along and subscribe in audio form for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week with more coverage. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.